Well, it came about because we would occasionally go back to reunions, our classmates, and the process was basically to pander to us instead of to engage our intelligence. They entertained us. They let us put tents up on the campus by class, and a lot of beer, a lot of music, and then they would ask us for money to contribute to the alumni fund for Princeton. Well, after a while, I thought this was rather depreciative of what they graduated each year, which was supposedly intelligent people. So we got together with maybe 10 of my classmates, and we said, why don't we form a group that will allow undergraduates and new graduates an opportunity to connect and work with a civic action group. It wasn't charity, it was going to be a systemic action group, trying to solve the problems, prevent the problems from the first get-go. In other words, to advance justice, not charity. And there is a clear distinction between charity, ministering to very real needs like soup kitchens, and justice, which say, why do we have to have soup kitchens if everybody can have a decent livelihood and get a living wage, for example? Well, it was amazing to watch. I mean, some of these classmates I haven't seen for 20, 30 years, and it just clicked, just like that. It was a meeting that followed a mini reunion of the class of 1955 at the Red Cross building in Washington. And we had 1950 cuisine, you know, roast beef and all that. And they had different members of Congress who were Princeton grads talking to them, Senator Paul Sarbanes, for example. And then I was wind up on a very rainy Saturday morning. And I looked out at my classmates and I said, what are we doing? Why are we meeting? How do we, as one classmate later put it, move from success to significance? And it was just a sudden catalyst. And then we met with a group of 10 classmates, and we started Princeton Project 55. And the idea was to place Princeton undergraduates in summer internships in civic action groups around the country and fellowships after they graduated. Now, we wouldn't fund this. We would try to get it funded by the various groups that we had on our list that wanted bright Princeton students to be in their office for internships or possibly full-time jobs. And we became the biggest recruiter for civic action groups at Princeton. And when we had the big parade, when we came back for Alumni Week at Princeton, as the various classes with their banners marched by, we got the biggest applause because the students had recognized what we did for them. And so we had an office on Nassau Street. And after a few years, we got a call, and this was on our, I think, 30th reunion that we started, Princeton Project 55. We got a call from some people who were part of the internship and fellowship. Turns out they went to Silicon Valley, they made a little money, and they wanted to buy us a mansion for our headquarters. And they did, right off the campus. So we now have a mansion, headquarters. It's now called, it's not called Princeton Project 55, it's called Princeton Alumni Corps, because bringing in more classes now. And I think we're staffed at up to 8 or 9 people. I mean, I've always thought the alumni classes, 30 years and out, are a huge human resource for civic action. First of all, they've known each other since they were 18 or 17. So they can be very, very candid with each other. Nobody has to, you know, prance around and be phony. Second, they have almost all the skills needed for a citizen action project. There are lawyers, there are doctors, there are business people, there are accountants, there are graphic artists, there are public relations people, scholars. And we had a class of 750, and we had all that skill to tap into. And so we then had conferences to diffuse the idea of an alumni class turning itself into a 501c3 and becoming a civic action entity. And we had conferences, and we invited people from Dartmouth, Yale, Oberlin, various colleges and universities all over the country, not just Ivy League. And one of these conferences was addressed by John Gardner, who started Common Cause and who was former Secretary of Health and Education under Lyndon Johnson, and who wrote this great book on leadership and also another book on self-renewal. And he was totally overwhelmed by the idea. Why? Because of the affinity group, because how quickly we could get together and trust each other, because we were a class and we had reunions over the years and we had many undergraduate memories and we had a great diversity, of course at that time it was all male, but we had a diversity of talents and skills. And he said, don't dilute the class. Well, unfortunately, as the years passed, it was diluted into Princeton Alumni Corps. And so it tapped into many other subsequent classes of 1965, 1970, 1975, 1980. Not quite as intensive, not quite as passionate. We had a principle in Princeton 55 that somebody proposed doing something other than scholarships and fellowships. We had our own projects, like we wanted to do something on energy, we wanted to do something on systemic mentoring and so on. And anybody who proposed something, they had to passionately pursue it. They just didn't throw it on the table and say, see you later. So we had that idea. Now, just think of the thousands of alumni classes, public, private universities and colleges that are 30 years out. That's when they sort of hit the ceiling of how high they're going to go in their company or law firm or university. And so that's when they turn around and this slogan, moving from success to significance, kicks in. And I thought with the conferences that we had, there would be foundation money for this. I mean, it's like motherhood and apple pie, right? It's a whole new human resource, alumni classes. And I thought that the people who came from alumni of other universities and colleges would say, wow, we can do this. There's nothing special about Princeton Project 55. I was wrong. I was wrong because although we got Dartmouth to set up some project for scholarships or Yale set up something, it was never the full menu that Princeton Project 55 had, never a fully staffed operation. And it's because none of them ever got the critical mass of about a dozen people. There'd be 2 in Yale or 1 or 2 at Dartmouth. It's not enough. We tried to get to Project 55 at Harvard. I went to their reunion. It was not enough. We never could find 12 dedicated people who confronted the obstacles, confronted the discouragement, got the legal papers together, talked to the administration, which often was jealous because they thought we're going to siphon money away from their alumni funds. Turns out it increased the money because a lot of alumni were turned off, as most alumni do. They're not all active and writing checks. But then members of our class said, hey, we're really doing something here. And so they became even more supportive. So it does take a dozen. We could never get a dozen. So we actually paid one of my class members to leave his Wall Street brokerage firm, Chet Safian, and work full-time on diffusion. He traveled all over the country. He went to Morehouse College. He went to Oberlin. He went to Swarthmore. He met with the top people, with the alumni directors and so on. And all he got was, well, this is a wonderful idea. Thank you, Mr. Safian. But it never clicked. So I leave it to people watching this program to pick up on it and make it click, because you could have thousands of civic groups. Some of them may want to focus on housing, some of them would focus on intellectual property or on biotech or on climate disruption, and just think of the resource, tens of thousands of people working together with full-time staff. Think of the arm around the shoulder of the younger generation. Think of the mentoring by action, learning by doing, that they would extend to thousands of graduates who today say, we want to improve our country and world, we don't know how. Well, this is the way to know how.
This audio recording was made possible by organizations working together for people, not profits.
And I think above all, the media gave coverage to this. The media is excluding civic groups right and left, local, state, national, like never before. They're into sensational stuff. They're into covering people who insult each other. They're into features to get Pulitzer Prizes or other prizes. They don't cover citizen movements unless there's real disruption. It's a terrible thing. You know, you're telling young people they have to turn over cars or in the street in order to get coverage. But in the 60s, they got a lot of coverage. And they got on the Phil Donahue show. They got even on sometimes the Merv Griffin and the Mike Douglas show. These are largely entertainment shows, but they felt some pressure from the Federal Communications Commission to put on, sometimes for the first time before 10 million people, these young civic leaders. And Phil Donahue was a special person. He was the greatest enabler and practitioner of the First Amendment in the 20th century, in my judgment. So you don't have that anymore. You have these mawkish type, sadist, masochistic afternoon network TV shows during weekdays. They're just horrible. You can't get on any serious topic. And even NPR and PBS have diluted their journalistic courage in that respect.